Welcome, one and all, to another magnificent episode of Terran Tuesdays. And we have a great topic to discuss today, and that is the fictional brewery that happens to occur in the various worlds we travel in media and literature alike, which is actually a
Yes,
very
yes,
peculiar
yes,
topic. This is going to be a good one. This is going to be a good one.
yes.
But how have you guys been? RH Snow, how have you been lately?
Oh, it's hot down here, but I've actually been spray painting my floor. So I had a concrete floor, and like we were trying to move in, so we put the paint on it, but we didn't put the sealer on it. So then the paint started peeling because when you walk on it, it's not sealed. So now I'm like spray painting my floor with like roses to cover up where all the peelings
Oh,
are.
oh, that's
And so,
fun.
so yeah, but I stopped to go talk to you. So hooray!
Nice. Hopefully, you got plenty of that floor done today.
I did okay. I'm just doing like I'm actually doing roses, like big yellow roses that are stenciled, and they're like about a
Okay.
foot wide. So this is a really small area, so it looks more like a rug, kind of
Okay. A rugged floor.
a
Yeah,
painted rug.
Mm.
that's fun. How have you been, Black Knight?
Um. Okay.
He's okay.
Um. I. It was like it was a bit strange today.
Yeah.
Uh.
The weather?
Be, yeah. It was first. It was the weather. Then it was the beer that I got
Ah,
because I wanted to try the beer that I never tried before.
okay. In the
Yeah,
spirit of the conversation.
yeah,
It
exactly.
fits very well.
Yeah, and first the weather was strange because it was like constantly wavering between somewhat chilly. There was like a chilly wind and a bit like hotish. Um, it wasn't that hot. It was like 24 degrees or something. But when the coldish wind blew, it like brought down the temp with like 6 or 7 degrees, so it became chilly. And the beer, it was, I don't know, it's a Weiss beer. It's German. It's unfiltered beer. I don't know if you've seen it. Um,
I don't think I have personally.
yes, it's good. It's good for your gut, but not that super good for your kidneys because it's unfiltered. So you shouldn't usually drink more than one or two, uh, usually. And so I had one with my meal at like for lunch.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I was eating,
How you feeling?
and so like it was hours ago, and it made me sleep,
Ah, the night
which is
juice.
like it's strange. I've rarely had this happen to me. It's like
Oh,
I drank it slowly. I ate uh, uh, the leftover of the lamb from Easter.
oh, not
Uh, yeah, so it. I mean, the beer was delicious. It was tasty. It was yummy even. Um, and kind of hit me in the sleeping center, in the sleeping nerve center, and I slept, I think, for 2 hours or something. Um, but that was strange because the beer had like normal alcoholic percentage. It wasn't overly strong. It was just like normal. I have no idea. And when I read the ingredient, they didn't add any like some weird hops because the Germans, they have this Reinheitsgebot, which is the special law which governs, regulates the purity of beers made in Germany, and they can't fiddle with the ingredients, even though they have like many thousands of small breweries. They can't fiddle with the ingredients. They have to use like specific stuff, and it was normal. I have no fucking idea what happened. Perhaps it was like the combination of the lamb and the rice and the vegetables and the mushrooms and the potatoes with that beer specifically. But I couldn't keep my eyes from closing, so I just lie down for 2 hours, and that was it. That was really strange for me.
Wow, that's interesting. Thank goodness it didn't happen right now. But hey,
Maybe I was
you're
fat.
maybe you're
I was
just
fat.
maybe you're just slightly more refreshed now than you usually are. 'Cause
Well,
there's
I think that actually it has to do maybe with the probiotics. You said that it was like unfiltered, and so the probiotics, actually in your gut biome, those little bacteria actually transfer nutrients and things like that to the rest of your body. So maybe it helped transfer some of those other sleepy time goodnesses in there. I've heard of stuff like that. Yeah, so it would be interesting to find out about that.
I wasn't feeling bad at all. I mean, I was feeling fine. That's the only strange thing was that I kind of felt sleepy and I had to sleep. That's the otherwise. I have recently checked with this small store. It's like super close by, and I saw that they have been importing like cheaper but quite good German beer, imported beer in cans and in bottles, which is like I think under $2 in your currency price range. And I've tried a couple. I mean, I don't drink too much beer. I have like probably one beer a week or something. And I've tried a couple of them, and all of them are nice. I even had like, do you know that joke from Skyrim? If you've played Skyrim, especially in the opening part where you're being carted to be executed.
Oh yeah.
And there was like that one of the guys in the cart. He's like, "Oh, dude, I remember this place. Like, this guy was brewing beer with elderberries or something, and it's perhaps one of the things which is it kind of like you keep thinking about it, even though you're fighting for your life. You're killing like giant spiders and stuff, and dodging
elderberry beer.
Yeah, and dodging like dragon fire and stuff. But you keep thinking about it, and eventually you find it. I think you find it. You find it, and you also find ales and other stuff in Skyrim. And of course, they don't use like expensive bottles. They have jugs made from baked clay, and of course you can buy them in the tavern with in pints, metallic pints. But that always stuck with me, and eventually I discovered ale, which is made in the Czech Republic, imported, and it was with elderberries, and it was bloody delicious.
So you actually found it.
Oh yeah, I found it, but not in Skyrim.
Yeah,
but did you get to
because
drink it?
in Skyrim you can't drink it. You can just look at it. I mean,
That's
your
so
character can drink it, but you yourself cannot. You can just like imagine.
That's so
But
sad.
I actually found it, and it was really delicious.
A lot of that stuff is inspired by the real world. That was a very Nordic game. And I know it reminds me of one of the safari books I was reading. They mentioned that there was a particular village of people who would collect
In
the
Africa?
grain.
Oh,
Yes.
yes.
They'd collect the grain, and they'd actually use a majority of their grain not to make bread as most others would, but they used it to make beer. And they would
that was
put
the
so much
Egyptian style.
they would put so much grain inside their beer that they would skip meals and they would just drink instead, and they'd stay perpetually drunk throughout the day.
Okay, so this is where we'll be talking about that in a minute when we start off. But yes, when you distill grain, you are sort of concentrating that caloric content. It's a way to store grain indefinitely because it has calories. It's like anything else. And of course, anybody who's ever had diabetes knows you can't drink a whole lot and be diabetic. You're going to cause trouble. And alcohols, of course, convert into sugars. So you have all of that. That's how you would save your grain. Instead of putting it in a granary where the mice would get it, you just make it into a beer.
Yeah. And beer can last a while itself too.
And in many places where, especially in the old times when they couldn't filter water, that was the best thing to actually drink because it was brewed. And I'm talking specifically about the Middle Ages. There were studies I read about certain areas in especially Europe where they would, because they dumped a lot of stuff in the rivers, and you had like plenty of like much more a lot more animal herds who would do their business around, and then they would often have the water polluted with piss and stuff. And by brewing the water into beer, you could at least sanitize it. I'm not sure about the taste, but maybe we could ask like someone from two of the most polluted in terms of water places, China and India. I've heard that they had like poisonous beer because the water was like so loaded with metals and stuff like lead and other shit, that the beer was actually poisonous. So
there's a whole history of that, and we'll get into it, I guess, when you're James. What do you think about all this?
About all this, well, I've always I think it's a fascinating subject because it's something that's kind of like a shared thing that's spread across the world through hundreds of years of trade and has become a staple in almost every culture out there. And what makes it interesting is how it's like this in itself discovery or invention that's unlocked, and you have all these different ingredients that are ripe for the picking that you can ferment and turn into this into the booze of your choice, and even into because you mentioned how the rivers were polluted, you couldn't drink from them. That was also true all across Europe and all the way until essentially the invention of tea, or I should say the invention of boiling your water.
Yes.
Everybody was essentially drinking beer. It was the safest way to consume.
Even the kids drank
beer. Yes. They had different levels, different degrees of alcohol. But it was about that purity. It was about getting those contaminants out of your beverage. And this is what they had. And this is the practice that the the settlers, the pilgrims, actually brought over here because they themselves came from a land where you couldn't drink the water. And an interesting thing is once we found out you can boil water and get rid of a lot of this stuff, that's kind of where tea and coffee came from. And then in the United States, we really adopted coffee. It was adopted overseas as well, but not as much as the tea was. And that's how both of those became staples as well, is a form of necessity and a different way to get that, what your body needed to just keep on going.
Well, and you touched on it here. This is a survival entity. You cannot live without alcohol somewhere in your society. The reason why, because it's a disinfectant. It kills microbes, and that's what it actually does. It kills off any sort of living thing. It's basically the first antimicrobial that most civilizations find. They have learned really quickly that you can put it in the water, and the water does not make you sick. And so they would water it down so much, I mean, to the point where you almost couldn't taste it. It was a certain amount per gallon that they would put in. I'm trying to think of it's like a couple of teaspoons per gallon or something like that. But you would put in just enough to clear the water, kind of like we do with chlorine now, except that alcohol is broken down in the body. And so you would have the water that you would store, you'd put it aside, you'd add a little bit of wine, you'd add a little bit of any kind of hard liquor that you had certainly would go further as far as disinfecting the water. And so it's one of the first things that people learn, that this disinfects. And not only that, but when you're eating it with a meal, or if you're drinking it after your meal, you're actually counteracting some of those microbes that might be in your food. They said there was a reason people prayed over their food, prayed for a blessing, because it could kill you. You could die from eating something that had food poisoning. So they served it with their meals, and they found that they lived longer, that there wasn't as much sickness, and that if you put it in your water, because they didn't have as much of the problem with heavy metals and stuff. Now we all know about that. You have poison wells, for instance, places where the arsenic and the other cadmium and lead are in the water, bleaching out of it through metals that are in the soil. And that's why a lot of them would drink river water instead of a well or a pond, because it would have the metals in it. But for a more or less pure form of water that maybe just has microbes in it, most people weren't dumping industrial waste into this water. They were dumping human waste into it, offal from cattle and things like that. And so they would put the beer or the wine into the water, and it would purify it. And they saw that it helped increase longevity. And so it wasn't usually slammed in its pure form. It was added to water daily. So they weren't drinking a whole bottle of wine or even a glass of wine necessarily. It was considered something that was important to life. And so they would usually dilute it to try to make it go further, especially if you didn't have an unlimited supply. Now, wealth brought supply. But that's when you started to see people would have a wine bottle that would be set aside for a special meal or something like that, and every day a little wine. But a lot of times the wine was cut. Even in the Bible, when it talks about in Jesus, but they'll turn the water into wine, it said, you haven't watered this down. You saved the best for last. Because it was pure. It was wine as wine was meant to be, and it was usually served instead watered down with the meal. So we have this. In our world of plenty, we see alcohol as a way to get drunk, or as a way to relieve the heart of sad emotions. And in the olden times, it was that way too. But because of its importance in preserving grain, for instance, when we talked about that, you could put your food into a granary, it would mold. You could literally get ergo from it, which is a form of LSD, which could poison people, and they would die frequently from it. And so how do you preserve grain? You're trying to put aside all this grain you grew, and you can't put it into the granary because it's going to mold over you don't have the modern equivalent. For most people, you have some moisture gets in and it ruins the crop, or the mice get in. Or
the mice.
Yeah, mice, a terrible problem. Granaries, for Gobet's Heke, I believe, is a granary. It was decorated, it looked like a temple because it was decorated with symbols of guardians to try to keep out the mice and the vermin. And so here you have all these things attacking it. You have to either make your bread very quickly or put it into something smaller, perhaps where you can keep it more tightly sealed, which is very hard to do if you don't have some of the modern conveniences, although they did have ways. But the fastest, easiest way to do it was to turn it into beer and eventually into hard liquor. It was calories. Now, they are called empty calories. And yes, alcohol doesn't break down into a sugar per se, but it does break down into calories. And how well your body does with that determines whether or not you're one of those people like us, that by me, or my family, as we're all raging alcoholics unless we are very careful. We can't process it. Our livers don't work well with alcohol. And I've got generations to prove it. And so it's something that but at the same time, my grandfather was a doctor, and without alcohol, he could not have done the things he did. He could not have sterilized his equipment. He couldn't have taken care of his patients, done their pain. It was how you got patients ready for surgery a lot of times, was to give them a couple of shots of the hardest stuff you had, because that was how you were going to dull it. So this is that double-edged sword that we talk about, that the industry that comes from simply putting fruit in a container and going back, and you can smell that smell, you know it's fermenting. You know something's happening. The very simplest things, all the way to distilling it into stuff that's so potent that it could actually be considered a poison if you drink too much of it. But in the smallest amount, it becomes a pleasure or an art, a craft, and it changes the way that people live because it can sterilize wounds and equipment. And so it's one of the reasons why in Watcher of the Dam, because it's a survivalist story. And it does have a lot of survival techniques and things in it, that a lot of that refers back to Fallout and to Skyrim. And so when we introduced it into the story, they've just learned how to make it again. They've just really grasped how to distill alcohol to create the shine, is what they call it. It's moonshine. And and Abuelita is the one that actually brings the craft back, as the Watcher's Abuelita, who teaches them how to make it. And they use it to enslave people. They treat it as a reward. They also treat it as a method of payment. And for many, it's also a way to bring you back to the table, because those who need it, those who crave it, have a very hard time walking away. And I'm living proof in my family. And so when I wrote it into the story, I have that double-edged sword. They need this alcohol. And I have at least 2 characters in the story, I won't give a spoiler away, who are actually addicted to alcohol and have broken away from it. But they struggle with it because it is part of their daily lives. They have to use it. It's part of how they keep their instruments clean when they're doing medical work. It's how they purify their water as well. And they use that to make their world safer. So alcohol is an extraordinarily important compound, or not compound, solution. Is this a solution? Is alcohol a solution, or is it, what is it? It's not a compound.
I'm not sure.
Okay,
Outside of my realm.
I'm not sure. I think it's depending on the form and the content, it could be a solution. And
I guess it's a distillate. It would be a distillate.
Yeah.
But so it's one of the most important parts of human existence. And without it, you probably would. That's when you see people sick, because the water becomes impure. You have to have alcohol. And so I think that we deserve to have it more in our stories. Certainly, it's a method of, it's a way of denoting luxury, of denoting the ability to open a bottle of wine when the whole village is relying on just having maybe 6 or 7 bottles that are put into a well so it stays pure. And then you have the rich guy up there has a bottle that he's going to open up and drink it, and he has people that are raising it for him. It is a denotation of luxury. And in fact, George Washington was so taken by industry and how to make things more efficiently. He said that every American farmer should know how to distill their own whiskey, because it was the fastest way to use grain in such a manner that it preserved it forever. And so it was considered not just a survival technique, not just something that people drank to make themselves drunk, but it was considered to be foundational to life.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, it was also used as a form of currency, especially in the old Mesopotamian civilizations, and including Egypt. It was considered a viable tax payment. If you didn't have anything else, you could readily pay with beer. You would almost all families, all families who dealt with grain, they made beer. Almost all of them. And they had, if I remember correctly, they had they added to make it like to squeeze the best like use of it. They would actually put fruit in the beer, and it would actually preserve the fruit.
Yeah.
And their beer, it was much different than what we have now. It wasn't as clear. It was more like the buzal that I mentioned before we started the stream. It was like really thick, hearty, and it did have like the more like the older distillate, the older beer. It had like a much higher alcoholic percentage, but like the young one was given to pretty much kids. Even the like it was considered healthy for pregnant women, which because it didn't have like it had like minute tiny alcoholic, like super tiny alcoholic percentage, and certainly it was like perhaps much safer than drinking the Nile, which was full of who knew what how many tons of shit.
That was actually used all the way up until I have advertisements from the 1920s and 30s that a mother, in order to let down her milk for her babies, because if you get nervous, it stops. If you and I, as a mother who has fed my children that way, if you get nervous, everything stops. If you're stressed or if you're upset, you can't feed. It won't happen. And so, in order to make sure that everything worked, they would give the mother a beer. And so, and it had to be weak. It didn't have to. You couldn't have it very strong, otherwise the baby would get overloaded on alcohol because it goes into the breast milk. And so that was a common practice until probably the 1930s. And even as a young mother, when I was trying to feed my own children, that was actually what women told each other: have a glass of wine. Go in and have a glass of wine, because they always, somebody would say, I can't let down. I can't, my baby's hungry and I'm just too upset. Something would happen and you'd be crying about it or whatever. And one of the older women would say, go sit down, have just one glass of wine, sit down and have that, or have a beer. But beer was considered to be the better choice. And so that persisted from time immemorial, back in the days of the Roman Empire and the Egyptian Empire, all the way till now. It's been considered a way to encourage women to be able to feed their babies.
Yeah. So, James, what kinds of different beers do you write about in your work? Let's well, we gave our listeners like a really nice historical lesson. So let's talk about fantasy beer now.
Yes, the fantasy beer, the sci-fi beer. I would say the ones who probably drink the most beer in my world would be pretty much the ones who are much more Conan-esque. I have like a Conan-esque portion of my world where very much like you said, they use it as forms of currency. They survive off the land, and that's a very interesting thing that most people don't think about as well. But while researching it, like you said, it's a survival food, if you will.
Yep.
It's a means of survival and something that people would go out there and just build.
Spoil.
Exactly. Yeah. So a portion of their culture is to know how to build distilleries out of what's around them and to produce beer from what's around them, because that's essentially where a lot of it does come from in general, is what do you have available at that moment that you can turn into a form of alcohol. And strangely enough, this thing that helped people survive for generations is there's a lot of stuff you can just pluck off the branch with the right process, turn into forms of alcohol. So they survive basically off of various forms of alcohol made from desert plants. So
Desert what?
desert plants, plants
Ah,
that grow in the
plants,
deserts.
Yeah.
Yes, as well as fruits and stuff like figs, particularly figs. You get plenty of fig trees out there.
Oh yeah, they're full of sugar. Yeah.
Exactly. A
And
lot
the
of my
corn
stuff is pretty grounded in reality, and a lot of it is basically like we said last time we were exploring maps. Depending on the terrain and the weather, a lot of stuff is dictated by that. And here we are discussing beer, and terrain and weather and biome all dictate the sort of beer that you may be making.
Well, also where you are and how free you are can dictate the beer you're making, or the wine, or whatever you call it. Or in the case of jail, Pruno, otherwise known as jailhouse wine. And you can actually
Classic.
make it in a bathtub. You take all the different types of food that you could, scraps of fruit, things like that, and usually fermenting anything that has fruit, sugar, water, things like Kool-Aid. Take it and you put it in a sealed bag for several days, and it could be dangerous because you make it the wrong way, it'll make you go blind. That was actually the reason why the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms revenuers were introduced, was because people were making their own alcohol. If they'd made it improperly, it could harm you. And of course, then that's because it's too high in alcohol content, or not high enough if it doesn't kill off the bacteria.
Wait.
Yeah.
But if they were actually created to kill people, to protect people, why didn't they then during the what was the prohibition?
Prohibition, yes.
Yeah, why did then they actually poison alcohol?
Are you talking about where they added stuff to the alcohol to make it where they didn't want to drink it?
Well, they actually added poison.
Yeah, it was like
and killed people.
No, I would agree with you. Yeah, so you put it in there. I know that they do that with they used to do it with Listerine. They called it the Bitrex that they put into it to make it so nasty that no one will drink it. And of course, I don't know how much alcohol that Listerine has now, but it used to be it was enough that people would try to drink it. People, in an addiction recovery program, I've had people drink hand sanitizer. We had to take it out of the brooms. So it can get pretty rough. So yes, any alcohol at a higher enough concentration is going to kill you. I know that there were some that did poison the alcohol. There were also a lot of people, and that would be about adding things into it that were would have their flavor covered by the alcohol itself. And also any type of process where people are not educated on how to make it, that can turn deadly. I think that the biggest issue during the Prohibition was that a lot of people did it to make money. I've not ever heard of somebody from an actual old moonshiner that went blind. I do know that a lot of people that went, and we had people that moonshined out here. I actually had in my church, and I will say this honestly, in my church, I had 4 deacons, some of the most wonderful people that you will ever know. All 4 of them were rum runners back in the day. They were bootleggers that would haul moonshine down from wherever it was being made and would take it to town during the Prohibition. And Texas also had dry counties and wet counties. In fact, there's a couple that still don't sell alcohol. And so you had to take the alcohol somewhere where somebody was having a party. Well, you could get caught by the police if you did do that. But those guys, they didn't have liquor that would make somebody sick. It was primarily made by people who didn't know what they were doing, that were trying to make quantities of it in such an amount to make money. And moonshiners usually made their own in the backwoods because that's what they did as their survival technique. And that it became illegal because the government wanted to control it. And there's a whole story behind that. And it's understandable. And it's a story for another day. When you come from a family of people that have literally been poisoned just by regular alcohol, you have a tendency to think, geez, if somebody would just stop selling it, my uncle would get better. He would stop drinking if he just couldn't find it. And that's not quite the way it worked out. It did change the way that they were selling it, or using it actually as payments. You talked about payment. A lot of the factories would use alcohol as a payment during the Industrial Revolution. And in fact, it was so common that after they got, if you read the literature of the time, there's a whole genre of literature that's just little children or women going to the factory begging daddy to come home, but he's so drunk because it was payday, and he either got his paycheck or he got the liquor that was given to him as pay, and he would sleep it off and stay up at the, and he wouldn't turn it in. And so they had this whole genre of literature that was just based around just that alone. So there's the American prohibition is an interesting aspect of it. How it writes into our stories is that we have a tendency to think of alcohol as only a good thing because most people don't suffer the effect. I think for those of us who have lived with it, we understand the double-edged nature of it. But in my story, I wanted to show it as a good thing. And so I had it as part of the medical profession, and also for people to be able to sit down and have a brew and talk up to each other. Finding, in one case, finding real beer. They said instead of basically, in Watch for the Damned, Abuelita's beer is actually more like Pruno. So it would be something that the revenuers would have wanted to get. It starts off as Pruno. She knows how to make it, and then she knows how to distill. And so she creates this, and I actually have a recipe in it. I don't want to say it on the air because I don't want to go to jail or something, but there is a recipe for it. And she makes it, and then she sells that recipe to the judge in the story. So that way the judge has a means of paying and keeping her prisoners under control. And so they're paid in liquor. And so, of course, they mix it to shine. But they're making it properly so it's not going to poison or blind. And I think for the most part, when you see somebody talking about poisoning the liquor, poisoning anything like that, usually it's to try to get a certain group of people. And of course, any mass poisoning is going to be considered to be an act of war at that point, or certainly unethical. And I know that that most people viewed it that way. I imagine they were doing it actually to send it to the mobs. And that's where some of the dangerous liquor did come from, was from the mobs up north.
Yeah. Well, in the case of my own work, I have beers and ales and ciders, and both in Starter and
Ooh.
the two other fantasy realms. But in the case of Star Shutter, they have because humans, and they've been making beer and ale and stuff like for many thousands of years. And now the difference is, like, the main difference is that you have the uplifted races, the gorillas, the bunnies, and the hamsters. And though the bunnies and the hamsters, they do not actually drink hard liquor because their liver is tiny. They possibly die.
Yeah.
They still have, like, especially the hamsters. Some of them have like manageable addiction to sake.
Oh yeah,
Which
sake.
is like, sake.
Yeah.
They love it. For some reason, their liver can easily process it, and if they don't get damage, they don't get liver damage from the sake, which is strange. But let's say
I am it the whole time. I mean, they're not drinking it like 24/7, are they?
No.
Okay, they can handle it. They're little.
That's like they probably have like more beer than sake, because beer is also like manageable. But that they're small, even after the uplift, like they're like at best like 2.5 feet tall. They're not huge. It's like even the strongest of them, they don't have like too much like a high body mass, so they can't handle too much liquor. And hamsters have their own beer, which is just like the bunnies. For example, the bunnies, they have special carrot whiskey, which they make from carrots, which everybody else considers vile
Mm-hmm.
and would not drink, but the bunnies are dying for it for some reason. I don't know what reason, why. Maybe because the carrots. But yeah, the hamsters, they have their own specific beer, which is made with fresh raisins, not the dry ones, fresh raisins.
Oh yeah.
And also what was that other fruit? Figs. Yeah, figs. Also figs. And in many cases they have like a mixture of this beer, and it's very like it's darker, it's sweetish, a bit sweetish, and to them this is like the bestest thing ever, even though they can drink human beer, but this one is their favorite. The bunnies, they're not too big lovers of beer, but they do love ciders, especially hard ciders, and especially ciders made with the most famous apples in the Star Shattered universe, especially in Terra Space, which are the giant blue apples from the colony of Apple Crate, which these are specific, strange, and no one asks why they are so huge and why they are blue. Nobody actually gives them, because they've tested them. They know that these apples are just like when they planted the seeds. They planted seeds of like what was that apple? Granny Smith.
Oh
I
yeah.
think.
That's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. They planted, like they ate. They had some supplies and they were trying to stay alive, and they rationed them. But like eventually the supplies ran out, and they decided, okay, so we are going to die there. There are no more food. We have like a couple of stasis pods. We'll shove some people in the stasis pods and they will survive. The rest of us, we don't want to like end up eating each other, so just like eat the gun, kiss the gun, after we have tried to live off of grass and munching like the bark of trees, and we've ate our boots and we ate our leather belts, because if you remember from the depression, the Great Depression, people were eating their boots, and you even had this like Charles Chaplin movie where they ate their boots. So when these apples grew, they found them perfect for making these hard ciders. They even use them to flavor beer, but that beer is not that famous. Like the hard cider is much more famous. But the most famous kind of beers are the biker beers. A biker with an A, not E, not biker. So they have super strong beers. They make beers which are like a glass can land you under the table. And these are craft beers. They experiment a lot with the ingredients, but they are not using like chemicals or stuff, or they are not adding let's say spirits, because we've had like during communism we had like a couple of super cheap beers over here, which they used actually spirits. They just added spirits to have the beer with a high alcoholic percentage. So the bikers, they often have special competitions, special beer brewing competitions, and yeah, they know what they're doing. They know what they're doing. They want you to drink their beer. They don't want to kill you with their beer. They
That's
want you
right.
to
They want you to drink it.
yeah, they want you to drink it. They want you to possibly buy it. And this is another way which they could make money for their space motorcycle club, SMC. And for example, one of the more famous, especially in books, is the beer Carolyn Roots, which is made by Mac or Uncle Mackie, and it's inspired by Lily's colony, home colony of Corolla, where the Mumpo trees live, if you remember. I think I mentioned them. And so the hollow label of the beer is when you shine enough light on it and you look at it at a certain angle, you can see one of these trees with a couple of dead tezarans in its roots, and it's actually crushing them, and the blood is like running up its roots, and there are barrels of beer in the tree's crown. So this is one of the more famous beers from the books.
That sounds awesome, actually.
Yeah, you definitely put more thought into your the influence of alcohol in your world compared to mine. Mine's pretty minimal, not too deep in the lore wise beyond what I did.
But it is there because it's important.
Yeah, because any good writer is going to research various parts of our own history and the cultures of the world, and when you're doing that, it's nigh impossible not to run into alcohol. That's the truth,
Yeah.
It's as we may know it, alcohol is like a pastime beverage, but that's a fairly new idea in the long course of history. So, yeah, my unfortunate insights into alcohol are primarily history based and minimal, because I myself never really drank too much in my day. Maybe a little sangria, but I was pretty soft on this stuff.
Well, I actually, okay, so even as growing up, my father was not alcoholic, and his father was. And on my mother's side, we had lots and lots of alcoholics. So my father would have a beer when it was cold, when in the fridge, and when he'd been outside working really hot, he would, go back and get one. He would sit down, he would drink one, and he was done. It was a way to top off the day. It was a way to reward a hard workout with something that would replenish your body and make you feel a little bit better about it. Maybe ease those aching muscles a little bit.
Yeah, it hydrates the body.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the other thing we forgot to mention. Yeah.
Yes. And so it's one of those things that, having grown up under that example, I was he actually had me try some, and I was like, okay, I'm cool. And he actually the way we did it back then is he would have us drink at home before you would go out into the world. Say, go ahead and try one, see what it does to you. That way you'll understand what it does to your body, because we didn't typically serve it with, little kids would like swig a beer. They'd grab one and swig it or something like that, but they didn't ever really drink beer. And so in my family, we had to be introduced to it. And while your dad might drink it, it wasn't something they ever give kids. And then they would give it to us to allow us to try it at the house. I tried it, and I was like, totally like, I really don't want it. I could taste the alcohol in it. And that's when my father told me, said, if you can taste the alcohol, the chances are that's a warning to you that you might not want to drink it, because it should taste
Yep.
good. It shouldn't taste like something toxic. And so I've always been that way. I can't, even a good wine, it tastes like, I can taste the actual acidic, that I don't know how to describe the slap of alcohol. It has a chemical taste, and there's nothing I can do that seems to overcome that. So I naturally avoided it. I've had other people in my family, and I say this honestly, that really struggle very, very much so with alcoholism. But so I see it from both sides, because I was raised in a house where it was something that, it was a reward. It was a way to make it better, And so when we have that in our stories, you sit down in Watch of the Dam, they'll frequently sit down and they'll put a bottle of liquor between the two as they're talking. And that's a way to make a contract with somebody. You put a bottle of beer down, or a bottle of wine, a bottle of alcohol, and you say, I'm going to share this with you. I'm not your enemy. Have a drink and put down I've seen my father do this, where he'd sit down and he'd bring out a bottle of Ezra Brooks and set it down. And then he would put down a shot glass in front of the man who was going to marry me and himself, and talk to him, saying, I consider you an equal. I'm serving you a gift from my house. And so that was kind of that camaraderie over alcohol, as opposed to just getting super blasted drunk and being really, toasted all the time. It was a way to form a social bond, to have a relaxing moment, and to share something that was a crafted item. And putting that into our stories, it's a great way to break the ice between characters, because so many times we struggle as authors with the white room, that we want to have this conversation, but we don't know where to stage it. We don't know where to put it. And for me, depending on what the scene is, if it is something more formal, there is a chance that someone will have alcohol involved, or perhaps in one character's case, especially, there will be cigars, because a cigar is another way to share, tap one out. Would you care to sit down and have a smoke with me, and we're going to talk? And so for my characters, when I have them sit down, frequently there will be tea, or there will be something, especially if they're not on the run and they're not fighting for their lives. They may have those little luxuries that really denote that you're in civilization. You can boil water and have a fire, and you're not worried about somebody seeing the smoke from it. Or in the case of having a true luxury, to bring out an actual bottle of scotch that has been tenderly preserved since before the apocalypse. And that moment of sharing that breaks the ice between the two characters, where they're a lot more likely to say something that's deep, or that is perhaps more emotional. And it certainly makes the difference for two of my characters who are going to have an enormous discussion over something like that. And I do have characters that drink, and I also have characters that are teetotalers. The Watcher himself is a teetotaler because he wasn't allowed to drink while he was on his job. And he had to be sober in order to do his job, because he's always on call. But I have other characters that will serve some, and will sit down and have a sip and talk. I think that it's a great way to introduce characters to each other, to see what they're going to say. And sometimes when there's just a little bit too much there, they may say some things that actually will form a catalyst for the next step of your book.
And that's actually really like you just mentioned, it's a great tool for such a great number of things, because alcohol in itself being a cultural staple around the world. I want to say two things on that, as a tool to further events in the story, a tool to get people together, and a tool for someone to make honest mistakes. It's something that we see in a lot of writings, where a character just makes a mistake out of the blue. But if you give them something like that, a tool, maybe they're sitting down, they're drinking, you have a deep conversation with another individual, and then something comes out that's not supposed to, and then the story just completely unfolds from there. It's a magnificent tool that can be used in a litany of ways. And another thing I wanted to say is, like you said, handcrafted beer is something special. And with that, I mentioned back in the day, everybody crafted what was available to them. Today,
Yeah.
you can order booze from around the world in 1,000 different flavors. But I recently heard a story of a gentleman who went to the Amazon of all places. And there was a gentleman. Yes, the Amazon. And there was someone he met in the Amazon who was from Venezuela, but they were like a bartender in this like airport town. And he said he would make drinks you couldn't get anywhere else in the world because they're made from various fruits or plants from the Amazon
unique
aren't
Amazonian
found
stuff.
Yes, the
Nice.
Amazon. So, that it shows you. And at one point, that's how the world was. Everybody may have been drinking, but we were all drinking what was available to us. And to this
Unique
day,
stuff.
there's some of those various recipes still out there to the point where to be a master brewer, you and yourself are a bit of a chef. You and yourself have a litany of ingredients that can drastically change the flavor texture of that for which you're producing. And in itself, that's where sort of that artistic flavor comes from, that poetic sense beyond just survival and just vice, but an actual craft. Because there are stories out there that are written just about the brewery, and all this talk really makes me want to hunt them down. Because as we stand, it has become in our cultures throughout the Western world, as something that is strictly just a vice, and that artistic and sanctified use seems to be sort of buried in a lot of cases, or popular culture seems to have forgotten it.
Well, it becomes part of ritual. Not only do we have it certainly in the church with communion.
Oh,
And-
and the monasteries,
Yes.
they brew a crap ton of beer.
Yes, yeah, they brew. It's considered to be because not only that, they're dedicated to it. So that's when you talk about getting a good beer or a good wine. It's not going to be something that would poison you or cause you to have an issue, because it's going to be something that's brewed. And I said it's meant to be a luxury, so they didn't just drink it constantly. There were, in Proverbs 31, it talks about a woman is talking to her son, and she says, "It is not for the king to drink, O Lemuel, because you have to make decisions, you have to make good judgments, but for the hurting heart, for the wounded soul that cannot bear what is coming, it is to help them." And so there is actually a scriptural reference to this, and of course it's used also in communion as well. And so we know that people still struggle with getting really drunk so much that they couldn't even rule a kingdom, even back in the day. But for most people, it was a luxury. So it wasn't something that they were going out and just going slamming all the time. And instead, this wonderfully crafted brew, which is usually not, each monastery has its own unique flavor, its own unique mark, whether it's a beer, a wine, any other kind of alcohol. Has its own unique character to it. And that was what they strove for, was to actually have this difference of flavor and texture. And that mouth feel that people talk about, where it feels different even when you're sipping it. And so me personally, I've had I think a Corona beer once, which I actually liked. I've had a glass of red wine, which I did have, actually helped me to stop having my son because I went into labor early. I took my doctor, who is a modern doctor. She was a gynecologist. She was actually trying to help me stop going into labor when I was 21 weeks. And I was very dangerous, because I would have lost the baby. And I was in labor so much that I was there for 3 weeks. And she finally said, "I'm going to tell you something I don't usually tell everyone. Go home, have a glass of wine. And we don't know why, but this should stop labor." And it did. My son was born healthy 3 months later. There is some.
That's great.
There is, well, it may be the fact that it had, like I said, those probiotics in it or something that deliver it. And also magnesium. They had me on a magnesium drip, and it didn't work, but the wine did.
Did she say what kind of wine?
It was a red wine. It was supposed to be a red wine. And I got good old Mogan David. So that's the wine I've had, is Mogan David, like the most sweetest wine you can find. There is a sense of sacredness about alcohol as well. When you talked about your little hamsters wanting sake, and of course I think of sake, I think of World War II when the kamikaze pilots would drink sake before their mission. And also in Battleship Yamato, the great anime from the 1970s, where they would have, before their missions, they would actually drink sake in the anime itself. There is a sense of ritual, whether it's communion or going into battle or to sit down at the evening and to open a bottle and just have one glass of wine. There is a sense of sacred purpose in it. It becomes part of life itself. It is part of the rhythm of life. And I think that's what we've kind of gotten away from in our own culture, is instead of just drinking to get drunk, there's no joy in that. My father said the same thing. He said, if people are drinking to get drunk, they don't even love it. They begin to get to where they hate it. And my family with alcoholics, they would almost hate the alcohol itself. But people who loved it, my father loved to sip a fine whiskey. He felt like that was one of the great joys in life, was to sit down and sip it slowly. Said, don't ever slam it. And same thing with a tequila that was made properly, that was made beautifully. He loved it. Yes, and the fact that it was supposed to be sipped, not drank fast, so you would get drunk.
It's almost like what my grandfather said about the our local brandies, which we call terquia, which are made from very sweet fruits, and this is exactly the same thing. Like you don't slam it, you sip it.
Yes, there is when you're viewing alcohol as a gift from God, because it purifies your water and heals the stomach, which it does. Wine can help with H. pylori, which is what causes ulcers. If you drink a whole lot of it, it may cause your ulcers for you. But when you just have a little bit with your, as the Bible says, wine for the stomach's sake, in Timothy, when he's telling the young man that his stomach was upset, to have some wine. There is a sacred gift that comes with it. You view it in a different manner. It's not meant to drown your sorrow and make you forget everything that you ever did that was wrong. It's that it's to relax you and to put you in a state of mind that you might be able to be healthy and happy and whole. And so those gifts of the spirits, as we call them, the gifts of brandies and wines and champagnes and things that sparkle and make life more beautiful, when they're actually used properly, and even in our stories, I think that using them to frame the character of the civilization you're looking at certainly helps. I think that it's like anything else. We see in most civilizations, we see a certain ritualistic purpose with beverages, especially tea and alcohol. And in Japan, it's certainly that way as well. And the ability to be able to write that into our stories, where it becomes part of the social fabric, is it's so interesting when you see it done in such a way that it enhances the civilization. Because I do believe that because of the nature of our own consumeristic society, where it's just buy as much as you can, drink as much as you can, do these things, we have seen a sort of a turn towards it must be bad. It's a bad thing to do that. And I think that we have to take it back to that more of a sacred space, where you're not just drinking tons of it to get pie-eyed. And when we put that in our story, we can actually define our civilizations by that, sort of putting those little rituals in that we can create around certain kinds of liquors and certain kinds of beers or things. And certainly in Lord of the Rings, I think that's where we see a lot of that.
The hobbits.
Yes. No, the fact that, that we have the fun-loving hobbits that are, it's always a beer, and they're going down to the pub and everybody raises a glass. And then you have it as they go into the other, the other kingdoms, you see a different way that they do it. There is a formality about it. And certainly that I think that it helps define that moment. Beer is a party. Wine is a dinner. It is a sacredness there that's a little hard to describe, but Tolkien uses it very effectively, that he sets the mood for where his people are and the type of festivities they're having based on the type of alcohol that they're drinking and how they are interacting with the community around them.
Yeah, it's and especially when you tie different, like, super special, let's say not super special, but certainly different and unique types of alcohol, in this case beer, which you tie them to specific cultural activities, let's say a festival. For example, on the same colony of apple crate, they have like they have a sizable population of merchants, and specifically merchants who are dealing with foodstuffs, and they have built themselves like in Japanese fashion. They have built themselves like a covered trade street, which is part of the new part of their town. It's not a huge town, and they have the so-called blind fish festival, because there are blind fishes in the huge river which is nearby, and so during this festival they make a specific it's once in a year, once in a star year, a brew, which they make it like a couple of months in advance, and it's this they're using that huge apple, but they make this it's a low alcoholic beverage. It's like a fast ale, which they preserve it. They make it fresh. It's sweetish. It doesn't have like too much hops in it, because they don't have to preserve it, because the hops, it was added to so you could transport the ale to great distances and it would spoil. But they have like future technology. They have stasis tech and stuff, so they make the fresh ale. There are others who use other fruits, and they make flavored sake, or they make brandy. And but this like this young ale, this young apple ale which they make, this is the they make huge quantities of it, and it's only drank during this festival, the festival of the blind fish. And you have these special platforms, which are graph platforms, are floating platforms, but they're made that they're beautified to look like big fishes without eyes, and they have large barrels of this ale, and they would like give it for free.
Well, we so often think of it just beer. We think of just grain and hops or things like that. And with same thing with wine, we have a tendency to think of only of grapes. But there's so many different versions of it. There's just cider alone with apples, and apples aren't as common in Texas, so they're not really as much a part. We have Granny Smith. You mentioned those. They grow well in hot temperatures. Around here, we usually will have Granny Smiths or the green apple kinds. But with the big, sweet, juicy apples like that, the cider is the way to go. And cider was such a staple of American life, especially up north. And James, you mentioned the Pilgrims, bringing these recipes with them. And apple cider is they got apples started, and in the American mindset of apple cider was just wrapped around it. It was always a hard cider. You might have a little bit of a, like a lower alcohol content for children or something like that. You just, dilute it and serve it, sort of cut it in half and let the kids have it. But apple cider is certainly one that's woven into the fabric of American history, so much so that there actually was a drink that they would serve in Congress. They would have kind of like a punch bowl. They would, and it had
Yeah.
They would keep it at the, and I've got to look up that recipe, because it was actually like a apple cider vinegar, which actually, and so you had the vinegar to begin with, but you also had it mixed with other alcoholic contents, and it created a tangy, sparkly drink. And they would just drink it by the bowlful, evidently, while they were up there making laws. So obviously it wasn't so, much that they would get, toasted, but it was that big a part of American life. and we sort of moved away from the idea of ciders and things. I think it's because most people don't know how to make their own vinegars or their own alcohols. And vinegar is a whole other thing. I could go off for days about vinegar because it too is extraordinarily important for and is part of that whole lineage as you go from vinegar to alcohol. And we actually talk about that in Watch for the Damned as well, where they rediscover how to make vinegars, and it becomes important for foodstuffs. But with alcohol, because we're so we've been consumers of it, but we don't make it necessarily. We have a tendency to think of it as only being beer made from hops or wine made from grapes, and that's nothing could be further from the truth. Each culture has its own special thing that it makes, and in your own worlds when you're building them, I think that making something in particular that is unique to your world is I think a great way to sort of flavor the moment that you have if you're world building, to say here's what they've made, here's how they made it. In Watch for the Damned, we have Mustang grapes in Texas, which are sour. Oh my gosh, they're astringent. They're literally sour grapes. When you talk about somebody who they had sour grapes, they are sour grapes. I haven't grown on my fence out there, but they turn to vinegar so fast, and they're excellent for making wine. And people out here especially love to make a peach wine. And I had one of my deacons. Yes, he was one. And we are a Baptist church now. So first, let me say that we're a Baptist church. So we're like the original AA, where everybody would go if you wanted to. I've had that conversation with my people, where there's a book in the back where a man kept falling away from church, and his wife would cry because he was trying to stop drinking, and they told him, come on back, but he had such a hard time. So we have it on our walls that we're not supposed to drink alcohol, but it says as a beverage, so you can have it for medicine. So my deacon's wife made it as a medicine, and it was a peach wine, and I swear to you, that was the prettiest wine I think I've ever seen. It had the most beautiful color. It was like a rosé, but it was just this gorgeous color. And the colors themselves are so extraordinary. When we think of clairets and brandies and champagnes. And I also have in my family, I have one of my young men who actually is a brewer. He's my nephew, and he has his own little microbrewery that he does, and he loves it. And he's so proud of the color and the clarity of his work. And I think that when we make it ourselves, we understand what it takes to make it. It's not something just to drink to go crazy with it, just to, to get drunk and go to stupid stuff. It is actually a moment to appreciate the art of the brewer itself, of the fruit that created this wonderful drink that makes you feel a little better and makes life livable because of its ability to disinfect and sterilize. And so when we make our own, and when we actually look at how to do it, and we realize how limited we are in our modern society of what we think of as alcohol and what it's really for, I think if we got back to that, it would not only make us better as writers, it would make us better as human beings, because it allows us to see that it's a gift. And if you're like me and I can't drink it, that's fine. It's who I am. I still can appreciate the fact that this is a gift from God. Literally, there would not be civilization without it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was about to say that indeed, with all the grains and the cultivation of plants and domestication of animals, alcohol is like ranked at the top of the things which are quite necessary for civilization. Yeah, pretty much. And I'm not sure about the. I think we can make brandies here from pretty much everything. I even saw a guy who was making like brandies from imported tropical fruits, and I mean, he was quite good at making them, distilling them, brewing them, distilling them. But sometimes he would make like a weird mix of different fruits, and the taste would be vile. So
Yeah,
not,
really.
not everything not everything is like working well. And I don't know
Yeah.
if you guys have like that fruit, the quince.
Quince, yes.
Yeah, quince. It's apparently quite great for making brandies.
I actually have a quince bush that I planted out in my front yard, and
Oh,
it's
nice.
considered around here to be an old-fashioned fruit, like a pomegranate. It's from
Yeah,
the
but it's super
earlier.
good.
I know.
It's super good. It has like a crap ton of vitamin C in it and all sorts of other stuff.
Yeah, and people don't seem to those fruits now. That's always what's fascinating to me when you go back and you say, how can you wildcraft an alcohol? How can you, or how can you use some of the things that they used back in the days that we don't use anymore? Quince is one of those that comes up, and around here we grow it because it has a beautiful orange blossom early in the. I think it's
Oh
early
yeah, yeah.
spring. It gorgeous
Blossom, yeah.
that and the
It's
pomegranate tree.
beautiful. Yeah.
Yes, and I've always said I want a pomegranate tree and I want a quince, and so I have a quince out there, and it's been hanging on for desperately to dear life for like the last 5 years. I'm hoping that it's going to finally get big enough to bloom, but my goats keep eating it. It keeps coming back, and when I get some, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll actually try some of it to see if I can ferment a little bit, and just to see what it makes, because
it's really good.
yeah, and that's
And you can
that's
make
an idea. I never thought of it.
you can make compote with that. I'll send you the recipe.
Well, awesome.
Yeah, the traditional Slavic compote, you can make the compote from quince, and it's super delicious. It's really delicious.
Wow.
Yeah, one thing you brought up is essentially the cultural aspect, which has been accented throughout this entire conversation. And I think that a sign of a good writer is somebody who actually looks into the past and asks questions about a litany of things that we now consider as sort of the norm and staples of our society, such as like alcohol being almost strictly a vice. And contemporary media has essentially failed in a sense by continuously focusing more on the now and forgetting the interesting aspects of the past and how the people that came before us treated particular things that we now take for granted beyond even alcohol. And even when it comes to like the most sensitive subjects, because for a lot of people the idea of drinking for pleasure or alcohol being something as a gift is a sensitive thing. And obviously a lot of people wouldn't agree, but in my study of the past, I realized that there's a lot of assumptions of the modern day that have just been clouded and shrouded by contemporary belief and morality, that a lot of people just don't know things of the past, and it seeps heavily into our media to the point where I believe, like I said, media is failing at this, that we're failing to preserve the past by applying modern day standards and morals to the past. So I would suggest anybody who ever wants to pick up a pen, start writing. Whatever you're writing about, don't always assume that that's the way it's always been or the way people have always seen particular things. It's good to dig in and ask strange questions like the whys, like the small whys. That's what I call them, the small whys. Like, why do we write particular way? Why do we talk particular way? Why do we think something is a vice, and has it always been a vice? And when we dig into the past, it gives us such magnificent insight that it sharpens not only our knowledge structure, but it gives us extra information to pull from to write anything in the future.
Oh, absolutely agreed. I think that we have a tendency to oversimplify our writing to where we are only reflecting our, especially when we're doing future let's say science fiction. When we're doing future sci-fi, we have a tendency to carry our own mores into the future. There are some things that we feel in order for us to write,
we're going to write things that are at least baseline, that we say this is a villain, they're doing these things, they're killing somebody, that's bad. They're killing somebody for the wrong reasons, or they're killing innocent people, that's bad. But then you have a guy who's killing somebody for the right reasons. Well, he's okay because he's protecting an innocent person. There are lines that we don't cross because we say, okay, this murder is a bad thing. We don't usually write a hero that's a person who murders innocent people or children or rapes women, because that's not a hero. But then we have other things that we say, for instance, that question about, is alcohol a vice? It's only a vice when you make it into one. And when you read the ancient literature, and I would strongly suggest for anybody going to sacredtext.com is fantastic, because it's all right there. And it's actually sacred-text.com. And let me see if I can still find it out there. Make sure that's not org. I think it's sacredtext-.org, I believe. And it has the old, I'm talking about from ancient millennia, of stories and folklore from around the world, mythologies, and that's why it's called sacred text. And I'll have to find it again. I've got to actually look it up because I'm not seeing it right now. I hope it hasn't been taken down. But they have all of the different ones that are from around the world that show you there are certain things that have been held sacrosanct since the beginning of time. That's just murdering innocent life. Yes, it is sacredtext.com. It's sacred-text.com. If you want to look at how they viewed alcohol, how they viewed vice, you look at it, it falls squarely on the human being who is doing it, almost always, especially in ancient Christianity, but also in ancient Rome. The allure of alcohol in the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, where he talks about drinking too much will make you do terrible, stupid things. And even then, it was considered a vice to be drunk all the time. Wine itself was not a vice. It was a temptation, which those who had moderation knew better than to do it. So we have a tendency to push off on the object our own sin. We can't control ourselves, so we say, okay, I'm going to blame that object. And there are certainly some things that seem to be deservedly have that motto. Modern day drugs, as we talked about, when you're talking about methamphetamine or drugs that have no use except to poison people. Those are certainly things that are evil. But when you look back, go back to these ancient texts and read them. See what people thought about it even then. You'll find a camaraderie there that you never knew existed. Things that you thought maybe that only we thought, but it's truthfully, it goes back. And in ancient, because it was such a lifesaver, it was on the person to react moderately. It was on that person to not be drunk all the time, because you had to get up in the morning, you had to work. You couldn't work if you were drunk. You couldn't work if that's all you did. And the truth is, if you were drinking too much, you wouldn't have money to buy more. You might be able to go and make it, but you have to work. You have to grow the crops to go make the grain, to go make the beer. So people, only the rich usually were really involved in a lot of heavy drinking. So this became sort of a litmus test. If you were so rich you could get drunk all the time, obviously this was gluttony. That's why gluttony is a sin. But as we look at different cultures around the world, we see how they reacted to alcohol. And it was not to blame an inanimate object. It was to say the person must make right decisions. And of course we know as the Alcoholics Anonymous, if you need help, then you learn how to ask for help and to stay away from it. Anybody needs to talk to somebody, talk to me. As AA, I was addiction recovery program for over 10 years as a leader. So when we're talking about these things that are created, we have to take on a certain amount of responsibility. And our modern culture blames the object. They blame the gun for the killing. They blame the car for running over somebody. They blame the alcohol for the drunk man. And in reality, we have to make choices. And that is a reflection of our own society, that we have become less about personal accountability and more about blaming something or someone else for our own sin. When you go back in these ancient texts and you look at how they write, you look at the different things, you'll see things that do shock you and horrify you, but you'll also find a lot of things that will help you write a better story, because it will give you eyes onto what things were actually like for these people thousands of years ago.
You know,
Absolutely. And we are down to our last 5 minutes. So how about we share final thoughts? Though we did get a lot of thoughts out there and where people can find you. Let's start with you, Black Knight.
Well, I think Snow stole some of my final thoughts.
No, you have to say it. You have to say it.
But in the case where you as an author, you wonder if you should. Don't wonder. You definitely should. Please. Uh, even the act itself of researching this topic, even if you do not like write heavily, let's say heavily involve it into the world building, like uh, my wholesome me, who actually created different um alt universe beers for beers that actually exist here, because I didn't want to. I wanted them to be different than the ones that we had for cultural reasons and for lore reasons. Even if you don't do that, just research it and you'll see. You'll learn a lot about civilization building. You'll learn about economy. You'll learn about governance. You'll learn about building, taxes, even, and also, of course, you'll learn about community building. So, uh, yes, please do it, even if you don't like it. If you don't like alcohol, just reading about this, it's not going to harm you. Probably it will give you interesting ideas. And as to where you can find me, as always, you can go to the Black Knight substack.com and read all of the current serialized novellas that I publish there for free. My amateurish poetry, which a lot of people are currently saying that it's not very amateurish, so maybe I have leveled up. And of course, you can go to Amazon and grab any of the Star Shatter books, some of the main series, the two anthologies. A Mandate of Sword and Railgun is the first one, and the second one is the Blood of Tyrants, and then two novels about Velen the Ultorian, and of course my latest publication, which is the 100% fantasy, old school fantasy, Lord of Bones. So that's that about me.
Excellent. How about you, Art Snow?
Thank you so much, first of all, for having this subject tonight, because I think that it's important for a lot of us that we see that black and white polarization. And I said, coming from my family, where I've had people die of alcoholism, to be able to look at it as that gift at the same time and to go, this is something that we must is as part of our lives. The civilization cannot live without it, and it is a gift from God. It's up to us to use it wisely, and if we cannot use it, then to accept it as a thing that we can admire from a distance, and to use it for the other purposes which it's meant for, to sterilize and to sanitize, and to take away the sad heart of those who are passing away or dying or in pain. And that's what the Bible even says about it. To everything, there is a good and a bad side, but sin relies entirely on mankind. We are the ones in which it resides. It would be a shame for us to turn away from a beautiful gift like this and to say that in its entirety that it's bad. Yes, a society that forces it on people, that shoves it down our throats 24/7, where you can't even walk to a corner without seeing the people sprawling and passed out or sick and drunk and dying of their own failure because they couldn't stop drinking. Doesn't take away the fact that this is a gift and that we are the ones who have abused it. We should restore it to its rightful place as a sacred thing, not meant to be abused, but instead to be elevated. And alcohol certainly is that. And when it's elevated to its proper level, when it's made beautiful and it's made sacred, then we treat it with respect and it becomes what it's meant to be, a gift from God.
And where can people find you?
At watcherthedam.com, where I have a lot about alcohol actually in our story, of course, and then all the way through the series. And we even have a couple of recipes that if you're watching real quick, you'll actually see a recipe for Mustang grape wine in it.
All right. Excellent, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. I'm James Esparza, and we're going to respect your time and let you go, everybody. But we do appreciate you coming by, so give the stream a like, share it with your friends, and if you're watching this on the repeat, leave a comment down below. But with that said, we are out of here. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. I love you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye, Stone.